I called, and after calling the phone for a few minutes, my husband, Jim, had finally picked up the phone.
What is it? I'm busy at the moment.
Carl was in an accident.
What? An accident?
He's unconscious right now. Please, come to the hospital. Quick! I desperately asked my husband, Jim, wanting anyone to be there for me. But my husband's reply was cold.
I'm working, so that's not possible.
My name is Melinda. I am 40 years old and I am a housewife. I have been married to my husband, Jim, for 13 years now. Our son, Carl, was born soon after Jim and I got married, and he's now in the 6th grade. My son has loved running around since he was a little boy, and when he was in elementary school, he joined the local baseball team for kids. From then on, he spent every day immersed in baseball, working out by practicing hitting the balls and running around. I wanted to support my son, so I drove him to the baseball team's practice and worked with other mothers to prepare drinks for everyone on the baseball team. Looking back to that time, it seems like all of my last 13 years have been dedicated to Carl. My husband was very kind to me when we were dating and took good care of me. But since we got married, he has become very cold to me. I was saddened to think that he was a man who would become cold after we got married. But then, as I was beginning to think that, I found out that I was pregnant. I hoped that my husband's cold attitude would change again once we had a child. However, Jim wasn't really kind to me during my pregnancy, and even after Carl was born, Jim seemed completely uninterested, saying he was too busy traveling for business trips or working overtime to go to the hospital. The first time Jim picked up our son to hold him was a week after he was born. And even after Carl was born, Jim still didn't seem interested and invested in our marriage at all. When I was home with Jim and Carl, who's still a baby, was crying, he would give me a blatant disapproving look and tell me to take Carl to a different room, as if he was trying to get rid of me and Carl. I was so disgusted with my husband's lack of interest in me and my son that I even considered divorcing him. But I had quit my job when we got married, and I didn't have the courage to become a single mother with Carl, who was still a baby then. So I had no choice but to stay married to my husband. Fortunately, Jim wasn't interested in us and didn't say anything more, which bothered me or gave me a difficult time. So I decided to cut him some slack and think of him as someone who's just there to provide for us. And 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. My son had grown up quickly and was enjoying his life, having found something he could devote himself to: baseball. When Carl was still young, he probably felt lonely because my husband refused to practice or play ball with Carl. So as a mother, I am very happy to see him enjoying playing baseball with his teammates as he does now. My husband is a person who really has no interest in my son, and as I said before, he never plays with him or spends any time with him. And when my son started playing baseball, he never said anything about it. Of course, Jim also never came to watch Carl play any of his games or practice with him. When my son came home from his games on Saturdays and Sundays, Jim would tell Carl with a very scary face, saying,
"Go to the door. Take off all the dirt and sand. Put it in a plastic bag. And then come inside."
Carl had always come into the house, after cleaning off the sand and stones by the front porch, when his uniform got dirty, and it was inevitable that he would get a little dirty as long as he played baseball. But my husband said that he really didn't like to see the house getting dirty when Carl was back home. By this point, Carl knew that it would be impossible for him to communicate with his father properly, so he just obeyed what Jim had requested. But I couldn't just allow that to happen. I was trying my best to not get involved much with Jim, but Jim would always only say this or that whenever he felt like it. "Would you please stop talking to Carl only when you are angry because it's not going your way?" When I said that, my husband glared at me sharply.
"Huh? Who do you think is providing for the both of you so that you both can eat and live? Without me, you wouldn't be able to relax around as a housewife. And Carl wouldn't even be able to play baseball. This is my house. If you don't like it, leave on your own."
That's how unreasonable my husband was. I am not just relaxing around, and if I didn't do the house chores in the first place, Jim wouldn't be able to concentrate on his work in peace. I was really angry at that time when my husband started talking like that. I want to be able to earn money on my own without my husband. My son could concentrate on baseball and still have a stable life. So from that day, my challenge began. When my husband and son were at work or school, I studied hard to get a certificate. I was going to try to get the certification necessary to become a licensed tax accountant. I devoted myself to my studies with a strong will to stay away from my husband. I also took online courses and studied intensively in a short period of time. Of course, I would continue to do my house chores perfectly as before, so that my husband would not say anything about it, and I wouldn't get discovered that I'm studying for the certification. Thanks to my efforts, 3 years later, I finally passed the exam to become a certified tax accountant. After that, I started working at an accounting firm as a part-time employee. Currently, I am balancing house chores and childcare while gaining experience at my part-time job. My son, who was still in elementary school when I started studying, is now a middle school student. My son went on to middle school, and of course he continued to play baseball, joining the baseball team in his middle school, and practicing a lot more until late at night. Now that I didn't really need to always take care of Carl, I have extended my part-time hours a bit, gaining even more experience and preparing to become a tax accountant at any time. But, as usual, my husband still seems uninterested in us. Since that argument a few years ago, we have become a couple that rarely speaks to each other. Carl also rarely speaks to my husband, and since Jim works overtime and comes home late every day, he rarely spends any time with us. Lately, he has been working even on day offs and holidays, and even when he doesn't have to work, he doesn't want to be home, so he goes out and has a drink and comes home. But for me, I am grateful that my husband is not at home. But while we were living like this, something happened that bothered me. It happened one day when my son was out with his friends in town on the weekend. A familiar car was parked there, so Carl looked that way and saw my husband with a coffee he had taken out from a cafe. Carl really didn't expect to see his own father and was about to ignore him and get back to the conversation with his friends when a woman he didn't know came up behind my husband and began to cross her arms to his arm. My son then thought that my husband might be having an affair and told me what he saw when he came back home. I was really happy internally when I heard this story. If Jim was really having an affair, it meant that my husband was to blame, and I could divorce him and also get alimony. And at that point, I no longer had any love left for my husband. I immediately requested an investigation by a professional investigator. A few weeks later, I received the results of the investigation, and as expected, Jim was having an affair behind my back. The photos were clear evidence of my husband's affair. Now, I could divorce my husband. Carl and I could live on our own together away from Jim now. But just when I was thinking that, something unexpected happened. It was on a Saturday. My son had just gone to a baseball game with his teammates for a tournament. But when they were coming home after the tournament, my son was involved in an accident. Carl was riding his bicycle to and from the tournament since it was held close by, and as he was crossing a green light, a car ran into him and hit him. Carl then was immediately taken to the ambulance, and I was immediately notified. My mind went blank for a moment when I received the news, but I quickly picked up a cab and went to the hospital. My son was taken to the intensive care unit, and I had to wait in the waiting room. My anxiety grew and grew. My parents live in the countryside, and they're pretty far away, so I could not really call them. So I had no choice but to call my husband. No matter how much I said Jim was not interested in Carl, surely Jim would be so surprised to hear that his son had been in an accident that he would come flying to the hospital. Well, that's what I thought. I called, and after calling the phone for a few minutes, my husband Jim had finally picked up the phone.
What is it? I'm busy at the moment.
Carl was in an accident.
What? An accident?
He's unconscious right now. Please, come to the hospital. Quick! I desperately asked my husband Jim, wanting anyone to be there for me. But my husband's reply was cold.
I'm working, so that's not possible.
Excuse me? Your own son is unconscious right now, and you say that your work is much more important?
Well, even if I go to the hospital now, all I would do is just wait around, right? So you should just wait for me.
No way. Carl is your son, you know? He is much more important than your work, right?
Work is much more important.
How could Jim even say that and be that terrible? Okay, fine. I've had enough. My anger towards my husband rose up all of a sudden. Plus, Jim says it's work, but I'm not even sure if he's really working or not. He's probably meeting up with his lover, isn't he? It would really suck if Jim was really meeting up with his lover at a time like this, especially when his own son was involved in the accident and being unconscious in the hospital. Then news came that my son woke up. It seems that he has finished his surgery without any issues. Oh, Carl! Thank goodness! Thanks to the fact that my son had been training in the baseball club, his body was not affected that much, even if he was involved in a major accident. But Carl did get hit really hard and he fainted, so they are going to hospitalize him for tests to see if there are any other abnormalities, just in case. I was a little bit relieved. Then my anger towards my husband began to rise up once again. I wondered if Jim really went to work. So I called my husband's office. I told them that our son had been in an accident and had been taken to the hospital, and that I could not reach my husband and that I wanted him to come to the hospital. Then the employee who picked up the phone said,
"Well, your husband is not here today as he is taking a paid leave."
Once the employee said that, I understood everything. My husband must be meeting with his lover. Excuse me, I tried to call him, but I couldn't get through to him, so could you please contact him from your side? I have to accompany our son, you know. I said it apologetically, and the employee on the other line said,
"Okay, I will try to call Jim right away."
If the company called, my husband would pick up the phone and come over because he didn't know what the people at work would think of him if he didn't show up at the hospital for this. My husband arrived at the hospital room a few hours later, just as I had hoped.
Hey, what the hell are you calling the office for?
Oh, weren't you at work? I heard that you were on your paid leave, but where on earth were you?
That's...
My husband sounded pretty upset when I asked him that. But when he saw that Carl was awake, he changed the subject.
What the hell? You said that Carl had an accident and was unconscious, but he's completely fine and conscious.
My son and I were both disgusted with my husband for saying such a thing. How could he even say such a thing to Carl? And even today you were meeting up with your lover, weren't you? When I said that, my husband's eyes widened in surprise.
I'm not having an affair. Don't make any accusations when you don't know anything.
I'm not making any accusations from nothing. I even have proof of your affair with these photos. As I said that, I showed Jim the photos I had taken on my phone, which I had gotten from the private investigator. My husband looked at them and froze. You're disgusting, lying and meeting up with your lover while your own child was suffering in an accident? I'm divorcing you. I'll make sure you pay alimony and child support. My husband's face completely turned pale at this point. But Jim got defiant and began to say terrible things to me.
But you're the one who's going to suffer after the divorce, aren't you? Can you, a housewife, support a middle school boy? Don't divorce and just stay home at my house and raise Carl while I provide for you both. But, well, that doesn't mean I'm going to leave my lover, though.
What a good-for-nothing scumbag. My son was just appalled at his own father being that way. Well, I hate to break it to you, but I can raise my son without you. I'm a licensed tax accountant. I've worked at a part-time job for a few years now, so I can start my career as a tax accountant now.
Tax accountant?
And it looks like I'll be paid more than you. My husband was just stunned, speechless. So, I'm leaving you and I'm going to charge you alimony and child support, so be prepared.
No way.
If you understand, then get the hell out of this hospital room right now. My husband left the hospital room quickly as he looked pale. After that, our divorce was finalized without any issues. My husband and his lover paid me alimony, and my husband also paid me child support. I also told the company on Jim, and people at work found out that my ex-husband had met with his lover even though our son had been in an accident, and my husband is now getting cold shoulders and cold glares from all his colleagues. But Jim has to pay alimony and child support, so he is unable to quit his job, and the stress is getting to him. I mean, he deserves it, and it's a really nice feeling to see him suffer that way. Meanwhile, I have successfully started my career as a tax accountant. I am able to create an environment for my son to continue playing baseball as much as he wants, and we have more money than ever before. I will continue to work hard while watching my wonderful son grow up. It's so terrible of Jim to not even try to worry and visit his own son when he was involved in the accident and was being unconscious, but instead, Jim chose to be with his lover. It is amazing that Melinda actually became a tax accountant after the divorce by studying hard so that she could support her child and become independent from Jim. I hope that from now on, Melinda and Carl will live happily together. Thank you for watching until the end. Please subscribe to our channel. We hope to see you in our next video.